There is a moment, you might miss it if you are not paying attention, when a 73-year-old woman standing in a hospital corridor decides she has heard enough. She does not raise her voice. She does not make a scene. She sets her purse down on the counter, slowly, deliberately, the way someone sets something down when they have decided they will not be leaving for a very long time. The nurses at the station do not look up. They do not know who she is. Nobody in this building knows her anymore. But her name is engraved on the cornerstone in the lobby. It has been there for 41 years, and what she just overheard through that open door, she will dismantle this entire administration before she lets it stand. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to 5:47 that morning. 13 minutes before her shift started, Flora Okafor was already in room 614, retaping an IV line on a 91-year-old retired school teacher named Dorothy who could not sleep. Flora was not assigned to 614. Dorothy was not her patient, but Dorothy had pressed the call button twice with no response. The night shift was short-staffed again, and Flora, passing by on her way to clock in, heard the beep through the door and stepped inside without a second thought. That was Flora, not because she would have described herself that way. She would have shrugged and said she was just doing her job, but because the evidence was everywhere if you bothered to look. The scuff marks on her shoes came from 12-hour shifts she routinely extended when someone called in sick. The granola bar in her scrub pocket, the one she would eat standing up at 2 in the afternoon because she had given her lunch break away to cover a medication pass, had become so predictable that the cafeteria staff had stopped asking if she wanted to sit down. They already knew the answer. 7 months pregnant. Not one missed shift. She had adjusted her body mechanics, coordinated with other nurses on tasks that required heavy lifting, documented everything, followed every protocol to the letter. Her obstetrician had cleared her to work through her 8th month. Her patient satisfaction scores were the highest on the 4th floor. Her charting was spotless. Her incident reports, 0. By every metric this hospital had, Flora Okafor was the best nurse on the medical surgical unit. And by 9 o'clock that morning, she would be escorted out of the building by security. Richard Calloway arrived at 8:15. You could hear him before you saw him, not because he was loud, but because he wore hard-soled shoes on linoleum and walked like a man who wanted you to know he was coming. He had been the department head for 2 years. In that time, 3 nurses had left the unit. All women, 2 had been pregnant. 1 had been undergoing chemotherapy. Calloway never fired any of them directly while not on paper. He restructured their schedules, cut their hours, shifted them to overnight rotations or weekend-only assignments until the math stopped working and they resigned on their own. Human resources called it operational adjustment. The nurses had another word for it, but they only said it in the parking lot after their shifts, one where no one with a title could hear. Flora knew, everyone knew, but knowing and proving are different things when you have rent due and a baby coming and a mother in Lagos who depends on the $400 you wire home every month. So she kept her head down, charted perfectly, arrived early, stayed late. She believed, because she needed to believe, that if she was excellent enough, the math would never come for her. She was wrong. It happened at the nurse's station, not in a private office, not behind a closed door. Right there at the main desk, in front of 6 other nurses, 2 residents, and a patient's family member who had stopped by to ask about a discharge form. Calloway did not sit down. He did not lower his voice. Flora, your position has been flagged for departmental review. Based on a liability assessment and upcoming operational needs, we are terminating your assignment on this unit, effective immediately. You have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings. Security will escort you to the exit. He said it the way someone reads a parking citation, flat, practiced, like he had rehearsed it in front of a mirror, and maybe he had. Flora's hands were still on the keyboard. Her badge, the one with the smiley face sticker a 6-year-old patient had pressed onto it 2 years ago, the one she had never peeled off, caught the fluorescent light. I don't understand. My performance reviews are... This is not about performance. It is a liability decision. While your current physical condition presents a risk profile, the department is not equipped to accommodate without significant resource reallocation. Your current physical condition. He meant her pregnancy. He said liability, risk profile, resource reallocation. But every person at that station heard the same sentence underneath the language. You are pregnant, and that makes you a problem I do not want to manage. One of the other nurses, Janelle, who had worked beside Flora for 3 years, looked down at her own charts. Not because she did not care, because she was afraid. She had 2 kids at home and had seen what happened to the last person who pushed back. No one said a word. Flora's hand moved to her stomach. Not dramatically, not for the room. It was the thing her body did now whenever she felt unsafe. A reflex. Oni has been made. I am not here to negotiate has been made. I am not here to negotiate. 30 minutes. He turned to walk away. And that is when the woman at the end of the corridor stepped forward. No one had noticed her. She looked like someone's grandmother. Blue cardigan, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, a leather purse now resting on the counter where she had just set it down with that quiet, deliberate weight. Excuse me. 2 words, not loud, but there was a quality to her voice, a density, a stillness that carried its own gravity, and it made Calloway stop mid-stride and turn around. I would like to understand something. You have just terminated a nurse in a public area, in front of patients and staff, and cited her pregnancy as the basis for that decision. Is that an accurate summary of what I witnessed? Calloway's expression shifted through 3 things in 2 seconds. Annoyance, confusion, then a flicker of something he could not quite name. Ma'am, this is an internal staffing matter. I am going to need you to... My name is Dr. Margaret Hollis. I founded this hospital in 1983. My name is on the cornerstone downstairs and on the organizational charter you signed as a condition of your employment. She let that land. So I am going to ask my question one more time, and I would like you to consider your answer very carefully. The station went silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that has texture and weight. She looked at the badge with the sticker. She looked at the badge with the sticker. She looked at the hand resting on the belly. Then she pulled out a chair at the nurse's station, sat down as if she had done it 1,000 times before, and maybe decades ago she had, and said 5 words. Tell me everything, from the beginning. Now I need to pause here for a moment, because if this story is landing somewhere personal for you, I want you to do something. Scroll down, leave a comment. Not for me, not for the algorithm, for Flora. And for every person who has ever stood at their own version of that nurse's station, or that office, or that classroom, or that shop floor, and heard someone with a title reduce their entire worth to an inconvenience. Tell me, have you been there? Have you watched it happen to someone else and felt that paralysis in your chest, the thing that is half outrage and half fear, and wished you had said something? Because what happens next in this story did not happen because Flora got lucky. It happened because someone finally asked the question that everyone else had been too afraid to ask. And that changes everything. Flora talked for 40 minutes. Margaret listened without interrupting. Not once. She did not take notes. She did not nod along. She just listened, with the kind of attention that comes from someone who has spent a lifetime learning how to hear what people are actually saying underneath the words they choose. And when Flora finished, Margaret did not respond to her. She turned to the other nurses. Who else? Silence. I am not asking as a formality. I have been away from this hospital for 6 years. I trusted the leadership I left in place, and it is becoming clear that my trust was misplaced. So I am asking you again, who else has experienced what I just heard? Janelle spoke first. Her voice cracked on the second sentence, but she kept going. She described the schedule changes after she had disclosed a high-risk pregnancy 2 years earlier, the overnight shifts that made her doctor warn about preterm labor, the resignation she had submitted because she believed she had no other option. Then another nurse spoke, then a resident. By the time Margaret stood up from that chair, she had heard 4 separate accounts spanning 22 months. A pattern so consistent it could not be explained by coincidence or operational necessity. It was a system. Calloway had built a quiet machine for making inconvenient employees disappear, without ever leaving a fingerprint that human resources would flag. And the machine had worked until today. Margaret walked to the administrative wing. She did not ask for a meeting. She walked into the office of the hospital's chief operating officer, a man named David Fenton, whom she had personally hired 9 years earlier, sat down across from his desk and placed both hands flat on the surface. "David, how long have you known?" His silence told her everything his words were about to try to hide. He had known, not every detail, but enough. Enough to have investigated, enough to have acted. And he had chosen efficiency over accountability because the numbers looked good. The turnover fell within acceptable parameters, and Calloway's unit consistently hit its productivity benchmarks. Margaret listened to his explanation the way she had listened to Flora's, completely without interruption. And when he finished, she said something that would later be repeated in every account of what happened that day. "I did not build this hospital so that it could run efficiently. I built it so that it could run humanely. Those are not the same thing. And the fact that you cannot tell the difference is the reason I'm going to ask for your resignation before the end of this week." But here is where the story takes a turn that the title of this video could never tell you. Because this was never just about one nurse being fired. And it was never just about one bad supervisor. The deeper Margaret and Flora pulled at this thread, the more it unraveled. And what they found underneath it changed both of them in ways neither expected. Margaret Hollis did not become a hospital founder because she had family money or connections or a vision she pitched to investors over dinner. She became a hospital founder because of something that happened to her in 1979. She was 32 years old, 8 months pregnant with her first child. She was an attending physician at a hospital in Delaware, one of 4 women on the entire medical staff. When she requested a modified schedule for her final month of pregnancy, the chief of medicine called her into his office and told her that her condition was incompatible with the demands of the department. He used that word, condition, as if pregnancy were a diagnosis, as if her body had become a clinical liability. She was terminated the following week. The months that followed, the legal fight she could not afford to sustain, the interviews where her pregnancy entered the room before her resume, the financial unraveling, contributed to complications. She delivered her daughter 5 weeks early. The baby survived. But Margaret spent 11 days in a hospital she could no longer afford, holding a child she had nearly lost, staring at a ceiling tile with a water stain shaped like a crescent, and making a decision that would take her 4 years to execute. She would build a hospital, and in that hospital, no one, no nurse, no doctor, no janitor, no technician, would ever be punished for the act of bringing a life into the world. And that was the founding principle, not a line buried in a mission statement, the reason the building existed. And 41 years later, in a hallway on the 4th floor of the hospital she had built on that exact principle, she had watched it violated, casually, publicly, and without a single voice in the room rising to stop it. If you have been watching this far, you are not a casual viewer. You are someone who cares about what happens to people like Flora, and to people like Margaret. People who built something meaningful and then had to watch it be hollowed out from the inside while their name still hung on the wall. If that is you, I want you to subscribe to this channel. Not because I am chasing a number, because these are the stories we tell here. Stories about the moments that test what people are actually made of. Hit subscribe, stay with me, because the part of this story that will stay with you the longest, the part that changes what you think this whole thing was about, is still coming. 3 days after the incident at the nurse's station, Margaret called Flora into her office. Not Calloway's office. Margaret's, the one on the 7th floor, the one that had been locked for 6 years, the one she had reopened that morning and filled again with 41 years of patient letters, framed photographs, and a single potted orchid on the windowsill that the maintenance staff had somehow, inexplicably, kept alive in her absence. She made Flora an offer, full reinstatement, back pay for the 3 missed days. Calloway would be removed, quietly. When unnegotiated severance would ensure his departure did not become a protracted legal battle that drained the hospital's resources. David Fenton would resign. A new chief operating officer would be appointed with explicit mandates around workplace protections. And Flora would receive a formal, written apology from the board of directors. It was, by any reasonable measure, more than Flora could have expected, more than most people in her position ever receive. Flora said no, not to the reinstatement, not to the back pay. She said no to the quiet part. She said no to removed without public explanation. She said no to a version of justice that protected the institution's reputation at the expense of every other woman's story. If Janelle's account stays in that hallway, Flora said, then nothing changes. Now, if the resident who spoke up never sees her experience acknowledged, officially on the record, then she learns the same lesson Calloway was teaching all of us. That silence is safer than honesty. I do not want a private apology, Dr. Hollis. I want a public accounting. I want every woman he pushed out to be contacted, to be heard, and to be offered the same thing you are offering me. Margaret sat with that for a long time, because what Flora was asking her to do was the one thing that would cause the most damage to the institution she had built with her own hands. A public reckoning would mean press inquiries, legal exposure, board members distancing themselves, donors reconsidering their commitments. It would mean admitting publicly on the record, or in writing, that the hospital Margaret Hollis founded on the principle that this would never happen had allowed it to happen systematically for nearly 2 years. It would mean Margaret's legacy would now include failure. She looked at Flora. She looked at the orchid on the windowsill, the one that had survived 6 years in an empty room with no sunlight, no reason to keep growing, and had done it anyway. She thought about a ceiling in Delaware and an 11-day stay in a daughter who came too early. You are right, she said, and I should not have needed to be told. What followed took 3 months. It was not cinematic. It was not a montage of triumphant courtroom scenes and slow-motion hallway walks set to swelling music. It was work. Slow, grinding, deeply uncomfortable work. Margaret personally called every woman who had been pushed out of Calloway's unit. There were 7, not 4, 7. 3 more emerged once the others started talking. 3 of those 7 had left nursing entirely. 1 had moved to another state. 2 told Margaret they never wanted to hear from the hospital again, and Margaret respected that without argument or appeal. The 5 who agreed to participate shared their accounts with an independent review panel. Not hospital administrators, not internal HR, but an outside firm Margaret retained with her own money when the board hesitated on funding. Calloway was terminated, not quietly. The hospital issued a public statement acknowledging a pattern of discriminatory practices within the medical surgical department, which naming no individual employees but making it unambiguously clear that leadership failures at multiple levels had enabled the pattern to continue unchecked. 2 board members resigned in protest, not of the discrimination, but of the public admission. Margaret accepted their resignations without a word of rebuttal, and something changed in Flora during those 3 months. Something harder to see from the outside, but just as structural as anything happening in the boardroom. She had walked into that nurse's station on the morning of her firing as a woman who believed that excellence was armor, that if she charted perfectly and arrived early and stayed late and never once complained, the system would recognize her value and leave her alone. She came out of those 3 months understanding something different. Excellence is not armor. Excellence is a standard you hold for yourself because it matters to you. But protection, real protection, comes from refusing to be silent when the system fails, even when silence is safer, even when silence is easier, even when the person the system is failing today is not you. Flora did not just get her job back. She became the co-chair of a newly created Workplace Equity Council. Not a decorative committee, but a body with real institutional authority, real investigative power, and a direct reporting line to the board. She helped design the protocols that would govern how the hospital handled pregnancy accommodations, caregiver leave, and medical protections for every employee at every level. She did this at 8 months pregnant, then 8.5 months, then 2 weeks before her due date. She finished drafting the final version of the new policy framework, emailed it to Margaret at 11 at night, and went into labor 6 hours later. Her daughter was born at 5:47 in the morning, the exact minute 3 months earlier that Flora had walked into room 614 to help a woman who was not her patient on a morning that had started like every other morning, until it didn't. Margaret visited Flora in the hospital 2 days after the delivery. She brought the orchid from her office, the one that had survived 6 years of empty silence. She set it on the windowsill and sat down in the chair beside the bed. She did not say anything for a while. She just looked at the baby. Then she told Flora something she had never shared with anyone at the hospital. Not the board, not David Fenton. Not the nurses she had interviewed, not the press. Her daughter-in-law, the one born 5 weeks early in 1979, the one whose difficult arrival had set the entire trajectory of Margaret's life, had grown up to become a nurse. She had worked at a hospital in Virginia, and 3 years ago she had been quietly pushed out of her position after disclosing a pregnancy. She had not told her mother. She had handled it alone, resigned, found another job, moved on. Margaret learned about it a year later at a family dinner, mentioned in passing between the salad and the main course, as if it were simply a thing that happened to women and was not worth making into a story. "I built this hospital so that would never happen," Margaret said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "And it happened to my own daughter, in a different building, with a different name on the wall, but the same words, the same logic, the same silence afterward." She looked at Flora's daughter, eyes closed, fist curled around nothing the way newborns do, holding on to a world they cannot see yet. "You asked me why I did not push back when you rejected the quiet resolution, why I agreed to the public accounting when I knew what it would cost this institution. It is because my daughter went through this alone, and no one fought for her, not even me, because I did not know. And I did not know because the system I built, the one I believed would protect women like her, had taught everyone, including my own child, that these things are to be endured quietly and never spoken about again." She paused. The orchid sat on the windowsill, catching the first light of a morning neither of them had expected to share. "You broke that silence, Flora. Not me. I built a building. You broke the silence. Those are not the same thing. Here is what I need you to understand about this story before you leave. It would be easy to watch this and decide it is a story about a powerful woman swooping in to rescue a vulnerable one. It is not. Margaret did not save Flora. Flora did not need saving. She needed to be heard. She needed the institution to stop performing its values on a cornerstone and start living them in a hallway. And Margaret needed Flora just as much. Because somewhere in the 6 years she spent away, Margaret had made the mistake that every builder eventually makes. She confused the building with the mission. The walls were standing. Her name was engraved. She assumed that meant the principle was still intact. It was not. Principles do not survive on architecture. They do not survive on mission statements or founding charters or cornerstones. They survive on the willingness of ordinary people to say, out loud in front of everyone, at personal cost, "This is not acceptable." That is what Flora did. 7 months pregnant, rent due, a mother in Lagos depending on her. Every rational reason in the world to take the quiet deal and protect herself. She refused. And that refusal did not just change a hospital policy. It changed every woman who will work inside those walls and never know Flora's name. It changed a 74-year-old woman who believed her life's work was finished. And it changed a newborn girl who will grow up in a world that is, in one specific and irreversible way, less cruel than the one her mother was born into. That is not a small thing. That might be the biggest thing there is. If this story moved you, do not keep it to yourself. Send it to someone who needs to hear it today, not tomorrow. Today. Someone who is standing in the middle of their own version of that nurse's station right now. Someone who is weighing silence against truth and leaning towards silence because it feels safer. Send them this. Let them know that it is not safer. It is just lonelier. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. The next story is already waiting for you, and I promise it will sit with you just as long as this one did. I will see you there.